Okay, hello everybody. And so far it's Jill and myself, but we're going to have our panelist, our amazing panelist, Danny, joining us in a minute. But we have a special announcement before we start. This is going to be Jill. I think the seventh. I think it's the seventh webinar that we're doing or live event that we're doing together. We had with Emily Churkin and with teachers and with Kara and with Jared Horvath and a few other people. So I think I think it's number seven. But we wanted to say a few words before we start introducing Danny and talking about the special webinar that we're going to have today that is going to be a little bit of a different format. Jill and I started working together, knowing each other and having conversations on the phone, maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago or almost a year ago.
Yeah.
And even though we come from very different backgrounds, we found a lot of common things. And we started talking, and that's when we started basically hitting off and creating live events and interviewing. And what we have heard from many people is the dynamic between us is really good. We like talking to each other with each other and moderating together. And because of this, Jill had an idea of creating a podcast, which we will start doing today. And Jill will give you a little bit more information about this. But what Jill suggested to do instead of the regular introductions is that since this is going to be kind of the collaboration more formal, and this is just for, community purpose. It's not for any agendas, gain, or anything of that sort. It's purely what we believe in related to children and how to raise children. So what Jill suggested is that we'll start with like brief introduction about who we are. So I wanted to first of all tell you that I'm Yair, and I belong to a group or a community grassroots in the suburbs of Philadelphia, in an area called Lower Marion. And I'm a father of two kids who are both in elementary, 8 and 6 years old. And I'm married happily, and I love my work. I work as a cardiologist, and I direct a big unit of cardiology in a big hospital in Philadelphia. And I'm very passionate about mostly, cardiology and internal medicine at the hospital. And I'm an educator myself. I teach, and I'm a professor, and I teach students and residents, internal medicine residents, cardiology fellows, but mostly students. And that honestly is the most important thing that I do that fills me with so much joy, this education. I also, in my work, and that's been my longtime interest, is related to technology and AI. I love AI. I use it a lot. And mostly, I'm a big believer in technology and artificial intelligence in the field of medicine. And I do consulting for several companies that are dealing with cardiology and AI, medicine and AI. And I can talk to you for hours, which is definitely, out of the scope of this conversation about why I think it's so cool and why it is really revolutionizing completely the whole world of medicine, patient care, patient education, communication, etc. But maybe because I'm so familiar with technology, I also recognize the potential harms for my children. And we live in a house that barely has technology. We don't have any, based on not so good experience with our kids, we don't have any more technology at home. We don't have iPads. The kids definitely don't have, phones. We're joking they're going to get their first smartphone when they're 40 years old or so. We even don't have a TV. And I'm not that I'm boasting about this. I'm just telling you the reality that we have learned that after we removed the TV, we started noticing that the kids are playing much more and being much more present and reading much more books and not even asking for TV. They watch TV when they go to the grandparents and stuff. So I got more interested in phones and how it's affecting kids, eventually education technology, started reaching to all these organizations, learning about it, researching about it. And this is kind of how I landed here. So this is a brief introduction about myself. And now I wanted to introduce, or I actually want Jill to introduce herself this time because she can say a lot more about herself than I can usually say. Jill will introduce herself, talk about the podcast, and then she'll introduce, and we'll start with Danny.
Yeah, you always give me a very gracious introduction for all of these. So I think most people are aware I am a public school teacher. I've been teaching for over 20 years. My degree is in educational psychology, and I did my master's thesis on how elementary students spend their time outside of school, the decline of outdoor play and increase in video games. And that was a long time ago. And I've always had a lens in this work. I became a teacher, very excited about the possibilities of technology, really was enthusiastic and used it a lot, was often doing the presentations to get other teachers to use the tools and materials, and then started to see a shift And then things changed when I became a parent and saw how cautious I was with EdTech, with tech at home. And then I introduced my child to EdTech, and that's when I completely changed my philosophy on that. And that was about 10 years ago. And I am really, really excited about our podcast, which is just going to be called Real World Kids. It's right now it's on Spotify, and basically every one of these webinars will now be posted there for anybody that's not able to attend live and ask questions. These are always done live. They're organic, so there's dogs barking, there's kids that sometimes pop in the room. This is as close as we can get to the real life. So welcome to the madness. You never know what will happen. Last time my dog was going crazy. But yeah, so this is Real World Kids, and we're really excited to speak to Danny, who I'm really, really, really happy to call a friend at this point. Didn't know Danny for that long, and he reached out to me. We are a part of a grassroots community group about these topics. Removing smartphones and social media from childhood, increasing independence and play, and wanting phone-free schools and intentional tech. And so Danny approached me, did not join without hearing what this group was about, because he does his research and has become a really, really big part of our community group. And it wouldn't be what it is now without him. He is an experienced high school teacher, a parent advocate, and he really is a compelling voice on educational technology, AI, phones, and student learning. What I love is that he has the high school perspective, which a lot of times we talk a lot about early childhood, and there's a lot of focus even right now, pre-K to grade 2 with devices. And it's so reassuring to hear that a lot of what we believe still applies at the high school grades. And without further ado, I present Danny Zeliger.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Danny, I wanted to start with when were you first exposed to ed tech? Like, how did this even become something on your radar?
Right. Right now, I'm concerned about it as a parent, but 10 years ago, I was a novice teacher and not a parent. And my assistant principal told me to use this product. I I was teaching in the Bronx. I had a unruly class of ninth graders who had some real learning difficulties and some real behavior difficulties. And the prospect of teaching them grammar was really daunting. But my assistant principal said, "Hey, there's this magic bullet. It can teach for you. You just need to do a little mini lesson and then it'll take them away. They will really learn. And best of all, no behavior problems while they're using this tool. They'll be engaged." And I'm using air quotes if anyone is on a podcast in the future. So it really did work. The product was called NoRedInk. NoRedInk is a writing instruction EdTech program. It's very popular according to their website. About 50% of school districts across the nation have bought into it. And it really did fulfill all of those promises. The kids seemed like they were learning. At least they were getting great grades on grammar quizzes. There were no behavioral issues while they were plugged in. I would say people often talk about kids using computers as if it's fun. I hear the word fun. The kids like to use the computers a lot. I have to say, for anyone who hasn't been in a classroom with a sea of kids on screens, it looks less like joy and more like opiates. It really doesn't
Yep.
look very fun. Would you say the same, Jill?
Yes, it's fun when they find the way to get to another tab and do something else and get off task. That's when it's fun.
Yes.
Changing the avatar, and you kind of know because all of a sudden you hear giggling, and they love that part.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so like I said, it did seem like it was working. There was this one problem where every year I would get one or two kids who came to me crying, like really intensely crying in a very scary way, saying that they were not able to move on. I mean, the way that No Red Ink and a lot of these programs work is it asks a question, the student has to answer the question, and if they get the question right, they move to the end of that module quickly. And if they get it wrong, they're given more questions intermittently on the same topic, and they cannot move on until they've mastered it. So that seems like a great way to teach because they cannot move on unless they've actually mastered it. But I had kids who took 2 hours to do a module that took other kids 10 to 20 minutes. And really just the way it broke down their self-esteem was horrible. But who cares, right? As long as they were learning. Uh, Here's the problem. I saw zero improvement on the grammar in their essays. A
Ah.
lot of improvement on the grammar quizzes, no improvement on the essays at all. Um, and there's a reason for that. So recently, I have taken it upon myself to do a little research into the history of EdTech, to ask myself, what is this program that I've been using? What's the history of it? And is it effective? And is what I saw it being effective in this very narrow way, but not in the more holistic, important way, is that borne out by the data? So what I'm going to share with you right now is a brief 100-year history lesson on the history of 1926 to 2026. Any questions, or do you want me to jump in?
No, I'm excited for you to jump in, and I love already that you told us there was an issue with the transfer because that's like really important for people to realize.
That is the issue. Okay, so are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And my hope is by going through the history of these EdTech programs, we could better understand the moment that we're currently in. Because people talk about AI as if it's unprecedented, but I actually think there's 100 years of precedent for what we're about to see. Okay. Um, so this presentation is on teaching machines, and teaching machines have a lot of different names. They are also called intelligent tutoring systems, adaptive learning platforms, cognitive tutors, computer-assisted instruction, algorithm guided learning, et cetera, et cetera. My theory for why there are so many names for this genre of program is that every time a company comes up with one, they present it as the new great thing, when really it's just the old, not so great thing. So we get a lot of names for it. And it actually predates the microchip. So what is a teaching machine? A teaching machine is an automatic device that presents information, asks for an answer to a question or a response, and then evaluates that response and decides how to move forward. The first teaching machine that did this was patented 100 years ago in 1926, making for that nice bookend for 1 century. I could only give this presentation this year.
That was wild when we said we couldn't believe it was actually 100 years.
And there were teaching machines that were attempted in the latter part of the 19th century, but the first one that actually fulfills all the criteria for a machine that can independently teach children was created by Sidney Pressey in 1926. Pressey was uh, a psychologist. He used his psychology to design this machine. And the idea of it is that, as you can see here, it's a multiple choice machine. There are these 4 multiple choice levers. There is a piece of information shown here, usually a question. There's a testing mode where it could just be used to administer a test, and then a teaching mode where a student cannot move on until they've answered a question correctly. And later on, he adopted this program and added a candy dispenser for when students got a right answer. He was calling he was calling for an industrial revolution in education, and he did not achieve it. It was the Great Depression. There was not really much of a market for it, and it sort of subsided until the 1950s and 60s, when there was a whole industry of machines patented and sold to schools and to parents door to door, actually by encyclopedia salespeople, such as the one that you see before you. And the reason for the resurgence is a man who you might know, B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is the father of behavioral psychology. Um, Behavioral psychology is the study of observable actions rather than internal thoughts and feelings. The idea there is that human behavior is guided by anticipated consequences from an environment. So good consequences or a reward positively reinforces certain behaviors, punishments discourage other behaviors. And B.F. Skinner, in 1953, visited his daughter's 4th grade arithmetic lesson and did not like what he saw.
Oh gosh.
His two criticisms, he was not a fan of school or of teachers, I should say. And his two criticisms were that all the students had to proceed at the same pace through the lesson, fair enough, and that the students were answering these questions, but they would have to wait until tomorrow until they got the answers to those questions. Also fair enough. So he went home and he created a teaching machine. And he was aware of Sidney Pressey. They had actually met up at some point and traded ideas. So I should pause here to say B.F. Skinner is really instrumental in the history of EdTech, and that's often not recognized. So it's important to note what his relationship was to teachers. Um, he called teaching, quote, white collar ditch digging. He said that
Oh,
grading is, quote, beneath the dignity of any intelligent person. Another quote, the simple fact is that as a mere reinforcing mechanism, the teacher is out of date. He called for teachers to be replaced by teaching engineers, and he imagined schools where instead of classrooms, students were in little booths where they moved on machines through information at their own pace.
oh my gosh. I did not know that about him.
And for anyone interested in B.F. Skinner and the cult of efficiency, look up the air crib, which is a really frightening invention that he came up with. Okay, so he made a couple important changes to Pressey's machine. There was no multiple choice anymore. Students would write an answer and compare the answer. As you can see here, this frame is a lesson on poetry, believe it or not. What a wonderful way to learn about poetry. Um, here a question says, which line has three stressed syllables beginning with the same consonant? And a student would have to write the answer, and then they would proceed forward, and they would see if they got the answer right or wrong. And the machine would take them through entire subjects, teaching without the need of a teacher present. Skinner never actually succeeded in marketing his machine, but we're living in Skinner's world right now. And it's also important to note that Skinner is also the person who gave us social media. All the theories behind the infinite scroll and the reinforcing mechanisms of social media come from behavioral science, and that is also the science that has created EdTech. So EdTech fell out of favor. There was a lot of bad press at this time. A lot of people actually did not like the idea of people being taught like pigeons. It should be said that B.F. Skinner did not believe that human beings had internality. We were just essentially machines that had behaviors. So there was really no problem in treating us like robots, and indeed, he called his type of education programmed learning. Okay, so it fell out of favor in the 1960s, but came back into favor in the 1980s with the rise of the personal computer. I'm moving through really a fascinating history here as quickly as I can, just so I could get to.
I can't get over the parallels. It's wild to me. Like all these terms we keep hearing now, and it's wild. I had no idea that it was ever discussed this way back then. And it almost makes sense that he felt the way he felt about teachers when you look at what they're trying to do to our role with ed tech. It's remarkable.
I mean, just to give you a sense of how much the past was like the present, some of the article titles were, "Can machines replace teachers?" I mean, have you heard
Oh
about
my gosh.
the upstate district that hired a robot? I think they finally went back on that after all the bad press. Another
Yes,
one,
they did. They did go back. Thank.
literal article from the 1960s, "Will robots teach your children?" So we're living in the same world. Um, okay, so let's go into the pros and cons of modern day intelligent tutoring systems, because there's a massive amount of information at this point, over 30 years of really solid data. And every once in a while, you see a study that comes out showing that a particular program is wildly effective. But when you look at the meta-analyses, what we see is a little bit different. So there is some efficacy for near transfer. Um, to explain this concept of transfer, near transfer refers to memory, or applying a skill to a similar task. So, learning how to answer a question correctly is very similar to taking a test, especially a multiple choice test. So intelligent tutoring systems are good for test prep because there's only near transfer that is needed for that. Far transfer is applying a skill in a novel situation or synthesizing a skill with other skills um, to create something new. And the data is that there is no efficacy for far transfer. That doesn't mean that these things don't work. It means that they don't work better than people. There's no evidence that they do, at least
When
for
you
far.
say, just a question, when you're talking about near transfer, I understand it's more skills to take tests, but when you're talking about far transfer and learning skills that will be relevant to something different, are you thinking more like, is this really the science of thinking or creative thinking? And not necessarily like I'm trying to understand more about
Mhm.
the concepts of near transfer because this is relevant to all of our EdTech nowadays as well.
Yep. Um, you're right. So creative pursuits, that would be far transfer because there you are synthesizing a skill in a totally new way, right? So this is the example I would give. If you're a science teacher, um, a intelligent tutoring system would be a great way to prep your kids for a unit exam. It would be a terrible way to prepare them to succeed on a lab. Um, okay, so another pro. This is the argument that Skinner made, and it's been made ever since then. Uh, these two really good arguments for EdTech. So one is more is more. This idea that a teacher just cannot have enough one-on-one time with a student to really give them the dedicated instruction they need. We're teaching a class of 20 to 30 kids. Um, a computer can supplement that with more education. And that is a really hard argument to rebut. If I had more time, I would try to make the case that sometimes more is less. Um, And then really the idea of personalized scaffolding, that it is teaching every student as an individual. People like to use the word individualization or personalization. That those are really warm and fuzzy terms. I just want you to remember that this is not a warm and fuzzy type of personalization. This isn't a teacher who's really getting to know the kid and figuring out what's right for them. And a computer can never care about a student. And I think constantly about those children who came to me crying that they could not move on, could not move through a unit. And it was almost like the EdTech was torturing them. Um, and then along those lines, I mean, people say that there is a lot of engagement with these platforms. And I saw myself that the kids were on the computer and not hitting each other. But it's a really narrow form of engagement. And it's important to note that when computer programmers use the word engagement, they just mean time on task. Engagement in social media is how long can we keep you scrolling? When teachers use engagement, we really mean like a deep immersion in your own learning. And that is not what's going on here. Um,
I love that, and I can't stop thinking of like our gamified typing program that I didn't use this year because I can't stand it. And if you looked, you'd say, "Oh wow, they're so engaged." But if you really look, they're doing whatever they can to earn the badges and the points and changing the avatar. And it's like you're right, it's the same word, but two totally different contexts.
Absolutely.
And if I
Yeah,
can say something also just about what you said, because it's so important, the way that I see engagement in these two perspectives is super important. Like the human engagement between a teacher or a parent to the
Mhm.
child is so amazing. Like we were talking before we started the recording about we all love Harry Potter and we read it to our kids. And when I just read Harry Potter and we're sitting in front of each other and they're looking at me like this and I'm reading them and I'm looking at them back and they're asking me questions. The way that I see it, engagement like this is being present. But when
Yeah.
the kids are engaged on the computer, when I try to teach them, a second language on Duolingo, they were not present. They were the opposite of present, engaged in the computer. They were sucked into the virtual reality of the computer. And no matter if I was They were just not there. And when I try to take it away, so you're totally right about the two meanings of engagement.
Yeah, yeah, that is a really vivid description of this. And when you're in the room, you can feel that feeling of the kids being sucked in to the computer. I mean, it sounds like we're describing a horror movie. It's not quite that, but it's not that.
Yeah,
Um, I couldn't help myself but put this image up.
I know.
That's the warm and fuzzy, engagement machine, personalization machine that's coming for all of our children. Um,
There's
so
actually a bill as of this week in New York State to not allow robot AI teachers. So that's the world we live in. That's a bill that we all hope passes.
so I guess lastly here, a pro is that it is effective for teaching discrete skills. So that it means skills that are very narrowly defined. That is really what they're designed to do. They're designed to teach one skill at a time in sequence. And an example I think of pretty good use of EdTech for me was how I learned how to type, which was on programs like Type to Learn. And, I had Mario typing also, which I liked more. I have to say, this really does show you that EdTech is not fun. This ruined Mario for me, but I did learn how to type. And I think this is a good use of an intelligent tutoring system because you learn how to do it on the computer, and I still type on the computer. There's no far transfer needed there. Um, and then my last con here, and I could say a lot, but I just wanted to quote Henry David Thoreau. He was talking about the railroad and the telegraph, but I think it's true for almost any new invention that an ed tech company or a tech company shoves down our throat. We have become the tools of our tools. And every time a new invention comes out, I mean, take AI, the human species changes the way that it functions. Um, as a community, even just physiologically, in order to incorporate the new technology. The railroad was an interesting example of that because the railroad is the reason why we all are so aware of time. And why we had standardized time become such an important part of our lives and why we have alarm clocks now. So I just think that's not a great way to live. And, that kind of concludes my argument here. We talk a lot about gamified learning. Uh, and I don't know about you, but the first time that I heard the term gamified learning, I thought, wait, is that bad? I thought games are good. And the truth is, games are a wonderful way to learn. And I don't like the term gamified learning. I don't see these as games. I look at them more like these machines that B.F. Skinner and Sidney Pressey were creating. They're programs. A real game, like take any sport a student might play, anyone who's played a sport or played any complex game knows you learn a lot from doing that. From doing these sort of gamified tutoring systems, uh, you don't learn this wide range of skills. You don't learn about yourself. You learn a very narrow skill that you probably are not going to be able to transfer to another domain in your life. So I'll pause there.
You're on mute, Jill. Unmute.
Sorry, I had a dog barking, so I made sure I was mute. I really am like taken back by the parallels. It's amazing how we've gone like full circle again. One of the things that you said is that like this history has given you a lot of thoughts of how to connect it to what we're up against now, which is AI and education. One of the things that we're hearing a lot about is the difference between student-facing versus teacher-facing AI, pros and cons. Everyone has different opinion, and also what implications we might have for AI in education after what we've learned from ed tech. That's like a lot there, but
I mean, as far as student-facing AI goes, I think this 100-year history gives us insight into a part of it. So there are two models of how AI is going to be used student-facing in schools. So one of them is AI as thought partner. And this would be, so I'm an English teacher. In an English classroom, that would mean an AI is helping give suggestions to a student while they're brainstorming for an essay, suggesting revisions, helping them with the process of creating a product. Maybe the way that some adults would use AI in their work. Um, I think the problem there is the cognitive offloading piece and also prioritizing the product over the process of creating something and taking away the
Yes.
meaningful struggle that students should experience. Not to mention the fact that I think it's really demoralizing for a student to think that they cannot create a final product without the use of AI,
Yeah.
that they're not enough. But that's not what I'm talking about here. The other model is AI as tutor. Um, the idea that AI is going to be able to teach our children. And what I foresee is that AI as tutor will look a lot like the intelligent tutoring systems that we've had shoved into schools since the 1980s, and going all the way back to Sidney Pressy's 1926 machine. It's going to be done differently now, and it's already happening. So I know people who use Notebook LM, which is a Gemini product. And if you put all of your slides and your textbook or whatever materials for your class you have into Notebook LM, it can create a study guide for children that works a lot like an intelligent tutoring system. And then there are companies like School AI that are specializing in this already. And I don't think it's so unprecedented and new. I think that these will maybe be good tools for teaching very discrete, simple tasks that don't need far transfer. And they'll always be great for test preps. Disclosure, I don't really care about tests. As a English teacher, I give hardly any tests. Almost everything is a performance-based assessment for me, meaning an essay or a project. Um, but these AI systems will be really bad at preparing students for a world with AI in it because it's intelligent tutoring systems, and I predict AI is really bad at helping students learn the kind of skills that they can adapt in the future.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up. I mean, I have a lot of questions, including what you're doing now in class. But
Sure.
the follow-up
Nothing, it's
question
summer.
to the AI, it's like when you're talking about, because remember, I deal with AI, and I know people who sometimes, in order to make it easier for themselves, let's say that they're on the train or they drive and they need to read some text or a journal or whatever it is for work. What they do is they copy it, put it in the Gemini, the notebook, and then it creates kind of like a podcast, if you will. It's like I'm asking Jill. So Jill, have you heard of the last and it's basically discussing it, but almost in a verbal. And a lot of people like it. So when you're talking about this type of AI teaching, it's not really what I'm thinking about, like the iReady and the programs and all of that. It's more maybe kind of an automated, the way that I see it is maybe it will be kind of like an automated, more of a digital version of Khan's Academy. Because I remember that the beginning of many years ago when Khan Academy came up, and I thought, I didn't know anything. I thought, wow, it's wonderful. Then I remember that in California, what the kids were doing is at home, they were studying by this cool guy who was giving he started by giving these lessons to his family members, and then he just started recording himself about this topic in math, that topic in math, et cetera, et cetera. And kids were watching it, and then they came to class and they kind of practiced what they learned. And back then I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. So my question to you in terms of the learning, Khan Academy or this type of AI future tutoring, which is kind of like Khan Academy, is this also harmful in the same way that the education technology that you're describing now with the machine and Skinner and iReady and all of that?
Uh, well, I don't know how harmful any of this is. The argument I'm making is that it's not effective.
Not effective.
What you're bringing up here is uh, that idea of creating the podcast is so interesting, and everyone seems to be talking about that. I personally find that a little creepy, and I don't love AI voices. I get weirded out by the uncanniness of it all. So that's my bias, just to recognize there. And then also, I teach in a content area where that really isn't all that applicable. Um, Unless I want students to read the Odyssey via podcast episode, which I don't. And I could see more of an argument for a physics teacher or a history teacher, especially wanting to use a podcast created by AI. Um, I don't know, though. I think that's a really narrow application. It's just delivering the content. It's not actually taking
And
students through the learning.
there could be a lot of errors. I mean, we had a recent issue in our community with a town meeting. The notes were, were transcribed through AI, and there was an error, and someone didn't check it, and the context meant a very different thing, and people got pretty upset. And it just made you think, like, how many times there can be errors if it's a YouTube video and AI is transcribing, and then somebody takes a summary of an AI transcription. Now you've got two levels of AI. Like, it's almost like you're getting so far removed from the source. And who's checking it, right? Who's even checking that podcast summary to make it correct? Because I know that anybody who has used AI, there's always errors. You have to be on top of it. So I'd be worried about what you're missing. And if things are up for interpretation, how can you get an interpretation of a text that has been summarized by AI? I don't know.
Right. One other point I would add there is that sometimes we're teaching something other than the thing that it seems we're teaching.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't even realize what it is we're teaching. So a student might have to read a really difficult primary text about the creation, or about the First Continental Congress or something. I don't know. And that primary source that they're reading might be really hard for them to get through. But what you're teaching there is not just the history of it, but the skill of working through difficulty,
Yeah.
and reading skills. And I do fear if all of these content areas that are not English start turning reading into podcast episodes, which I don't see happening. But if that was to happen, English would be the only place where students learn how to read as adults. And students are still learning how to read in high school. They're not fully formed readers at that point.
And I just have to comment on what you said because, that's kind of like me and Jill being the duo. I teach and educate older, people who are now post-college, mostly, medical students and residents, et cetera. And I think that the interesting thing is that there's been in 20 years an evolution in the study in the way that students are studying medicine. I'm telling you, I mean, when I studied medicine, and again, I'm not saying that it was all perfect. It was very painful in many times, but
Yeah.
part of the pain was that we had a book. I could run downstairs, but I don't want to waste the time. We had books like internal medicine, Harrison, which is unbelievable, like a book this big of 1,500, like, and each page is like so much text, or anatomy or physiology or biochemistry. It's all books, all that we learn. And yes, we could go to the internet and whatever, but mostly it was based on textbooks. So if I had a complicated patient and presented with just simple pneumonia or heart attack, I went back to the book and I started reading from the textbook. And it taught me first how to read, how to process, how to learn, but also from the context, from what I was learning, I learned other stuff from reading about it. And I think that what is happening now, and I'm hearing this more and more from both students and medical educators and deans and associate deans and program residents, is that it's changing very rapidly. And in medical school, it's rare to have textbooks. And most of the studies are done in, prep, how kind of like you're preparing yourself for taking a test, that you have like a website that you're Mix app or whatever, and you learn, or there's flashcards, digital, and more I'm hearing of residents and students who, instead of reading a full article of, like, nobody reads anymore. Mostly you're getting emails of processed, of the processed article, or like I said, this podcast simulation of the article. But it's very, very rare that young medical students, and this is across the board, it's related to engineering and physics and all of that. It's hard to find it's harder to find people who are reading long, complicated texts. And I think that it's I told Jill this before, and I'll say just this and I'll stop, is that what I'm hearing as I got into learning more about education technology and kids, I've been hearing there was a guy who was an engineer at Comcast, and he reached out to me and he said, you know why I'm so concerned about it is because for 20 years, I've been teaching young engineers, and something has happened in the last 10 years. They were previously deep thinkers and they were slow thinkers, in a good way slow. They would take their time. And right now, they don't have the patience. They have to move from, and they're very like, they need like beats, processed beats in terms of feed their, and it's harming the way that they work. So I think it is all related to the bottom line is reading. So that's
Yeah,
kind of my,
reading is thinking, and learning to read is learning to think.
And I also am concerned about like a podcast being a way to get your primary information because we're all multitasking when we're listening to something, like I'm cleaning the house when I listen to an audiobook or podcast, making food, I'm not fully engaged and focused on what I should be, which makes podcasts like a fun thing to do when I am doing something else, right? But not, it wouldn't be the best way. And I followed it up with, I just flew home from Utah and I was sitting next to a woman and she had, I think I might have told you this, Danny. It was so interesting. I couldn't believe that I was sitting next to a person who was reading what looked like a medical study with a pen and taking notes. And I was actually reading Perk's book. Yeah, we're interviewing Perk next week. The Struggle is Real. And she has a whole section on about the brain. And so I'm reading about the brain and I'm actually not understanding this chapter at all. It was way above me. And then I look over at this person and she tells me she's a neuroscientist. And I'm like, oh, look what I'm reading. And I said, I noticed you're reading a study with paper and marking it up and taking notes. And she says, yeah, of course, that is the only way you can actually learn what you're doing. And I was like, it was like music to my ears. I was like, oh, thank you. And then I told her a little bit about what I do. And it's just funny because we keep seeing the same thing. And then we're being told like, we have to prepare them for the real world. Well, that's the real world. This is a neuroscientist studying the effects of traumatic brain injury on patients. And she's got a study that she is printed out and highlighting and writing notes. It wasn't in her Google Classroom for work, like, I don't know.
And as a neuroscientist, she might know that she is more likely to learn the material if it's printed out and on paper.
Yes.
And it's, well known at this point that material delivered digitally, written material delivered digitally is not as well retained because it turns out that the location of where words are on a page gets logged in our memories and helps us actually process and memorize the information. So it's fascinating to hear about people who are in working already in a profession or who are working in medical school, right, about to go into a profession, and to see these issues still affecting them. Because
Yes.
the thing I hear all the time is this careerism that infiltrates its way down into high school, and I think maybe even middle and elementary school. The idea that we should be preparing students for jobs, which I completely reject and disagree with. I don't think that that high school and even college perhaps should be about job prep. But even Yair, you're saying that when medical students are not going through the difficult process of reading, one would think all they need to know is the medical fact. But you're saying no, the actual thinking process that goes into that deep study matters as well to the medical practice.
and I think listen, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm working with a lot of students that are brilliant, but yes, I think that the ability of deep learning, from my perspective, has changed. And people more and more, including young doctors and myself as well, instead of going to textbooks, because we're busy, because we do so many different stuff, we now have AI, including tools that are, one of them is called Open Evidence. There's a few others, but they're kind of GPT for physicians. And you're able to do whatever you want. They're even HIPAA compliant. So you can basically say, listen, I have a patient like this who is in their 60s. They come with these symptoms. This is their labs. What do you think? And then it's kind of like, it's doing what a young doctor should be doing, which is thinking about the differential diagnosis and what should be the next tests. And I mean, it's hard for me to know how all of this will. This is kind of like a deeper conversation than what we're having. How this will evolve. How will the physician evolve in 10 years and 5 years? You remember, I do a lot of AI, so I see also the benefits of it in terms of helping with diagnosis, choosing the right treatments that maybe we don't remember. I mean, ultimately, what it is to be a healthcare provider and a physician, it's what will never be replaced by machines is the true empathy that I sit down with an old patient and I hug her, I hold her hands, I give her tissue when she's crying, and I talk to her and I give her my full attention and love. And I think that that's something that perhaps the future of the physicians will be kind of like, in a way, cyborgs, that the AI will tell them how to practice medicine or what to do
Oh, yeah,
next.
you're scaring me. I don't want that future because we're making
Listen,
people dependent on a tool. And what happens when the tool doesn't work? What happens when, like, I don't know. I just, I
well,
think you can't be
yes,
dependent on something that you might not always have access to or
uh,
could malfunction or,
I
you
know,
know?
and this is kind of funny because like the conversation completely changed, but now it sounds like I'm very pro AI, which in many kinds. But don't forget that this is an evolving field. For example, you were talking about earlier about the hallucinations of how the system, the AI, summarizes this and it makes mistakes, and the mistakes are being carried. The hallucinations and the old models of Claude, GPT, et cetera, were much higher than
Yeah.
now. And there are systems, including in medicine, to double and triple check that there will not be hallucinations and mistakes. And I predict that in the future, we're going to have more accuracy and even less mistakes, especially those that are carry on with more protection mechanisms. So I think that a lot of the fears will change. What I know for a fact, and then we cannot talk about the doctors anymore, is that the field of physicians and healthcare and how physicians are practicing medicine is going to be very different. It's already very different than 5 years ago, and it will be very different from 5 years from now. So this is, I don't know how we got into the segue of
I
AI.
wonder if there'll be patients that want to go to AI-free clinics. Come to this place that we will not use AI. We will, I don't know. I mean, it makes me think we've got this movement in education, right? Where we have parents that don't want this stuff for their kids. Um, I don't know. It would make me nervous to not have human oversight, and it makes me more nervous in the future if all the child knew was a world where they were depending on that tool and that's all the student learned, you know?
Well, that's very
Um,
true. But remember that, like, although I love I think that AI and EdTech is a disaster for children. In the
but so
past
you
year,
don't think it's a disaster for
so
adults
that,
too, in some
so
ways?
what I'm saying is that for kids, it's a
Yeah.
disaster. I don't want my kids to be in front of robotics. I already last year, I completely opted out both of my kids, and they were pretty much the only ones without the computer, and they got a special, pack of papers and stuff, because I think that this special connection between the educator, the teacher, and the
Mhm.
child is so important. And in the same way, that specific connection between the physician and the patients is something that will never be replaced, in my opinion. And that's why I think the physician should stay and be the connection, maybe use AI. But I think that in the same way for our children, you and Danny and other amazing teachers who are so present and loving, it's not necessarily about the content. It's about the body language and the tone of your voice and how you're looking into their eyes. And there's so much more than it sounds like I'm giving a speech. I apologize, but I see the similarities between physicians that have to stay, this empathy, the compassion, the human connection, and the same with teachers.
Mhm.
I mean, if you think back to your favorite teacher in, K through 12, or your favorite teachers, they're probably not the teachers whose class you did the best in. It might be, but it's always the teachers who made you feel the best, or
Yeah.
the teachers who were a role model, who taught you something about what it means to be a person in the world. Robot's not going to do that.
To
Yeah.
me, it was almost like, the my favorite. You just made me think about my favorite teacher. It was almost like in a way, maybe it's weird to say, like a second mother. The emotional connection that I had with her was so incredible. Like, I'll never forget her.
Aw.
It's beautiful.
So this makes me think, Danny, what do you think is like a solution? Like, what do you think? we should be doing in schools. And I almost want to focus on upper education because we do focus so much on, elementary right now. What do you think is like how educators should approach technology in you could go if you want elementary, middle, high school, but definitely curious about high school.
I think it's simpler for elementary. I think
Yeah,
it's very simple. It's you get the technology out of the building.
yeah.
It's just as simple as that. There is not a strong enough reason. And maybe there are some ed tech programs that show some efficacy. There's more efficacy with math learning programs, a little bit with early reading intervention programs, a little bit. And even that really depends on the quality of the school and the quality of the teachers at the school. So at a school where there are excellent teachers, these learning products, these tech products don't have much of an impact on school in schools with very inconsistent teaching. They kind of give everyone at least a floor, a minimum of
Yeah.
some learning. But I think they should just be taken out of the building. I am not against teaching kids to use technology. That is very different than using technology to teach kids, right? So
Mhm.
I would be okay with a computer lab where kids go once a week or however frequently to learn about maybe programming or something, but not to be using the computers to teach them how to read or to add.
Yeah.
Um, Middle school, um, I think there need to be limits.
Okay.
It makes more sense at this point. The students are um, approaching um, adulthood and should probably develop some important study habits.
Could
Um,
you define middle school? Because I'm noticing that every school has a different middle school grade. So when you say middle school, what is the grade you have in mind for where this would transition?
Unfortunately, in our district, that's 5 through 8,
Yes.
which
My
is
license is elementary education and it goes to sixth grade because sixth grade is really usually under the elementary umbrella, which most people don't know.
yeah,
So I'm already prepping my child to know that just because you're in a middle school building doesn't mean you're a middle schooler because I think that we actually are forcing kids to grow up too fast by having both the parents and the kids think they're now like
yeah.
middle school. I don't know. So when you say middle school, you're thinking mostly six, seven, eight, or seven, eight?
6, 7, 8 is what I went through as a kid, and I feel like
Yeah.
most schools in the area are 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Some are just 7, 8. Yeah, I could understand an argument for having some personal tech, maybe some one-to-one tech in middle school. I don't think they should be going home. I don't think homework
Mhm.
should be computer based. We're giving up too much. And the problem with all technology is that you don't realize what you're giving up until it's too late.
Yeah.
The example I always give with myself is Google Maps. I did not get an iPhone until I was 21 or 22 years old. I was driving since I was 16, so I used MapQuest. I printed out directions. I pulled over and I asked for directions. I got lost.
Yeah.
But I learned the streets of the places that I lived really well. At
Yeah.
times, I was like a taxi driver. I knew where everything was. Now I have Google Maps and it's wonderful. What a great world, to live in with Google Maps. However, my sense of direction is terrible and it must
Same
be
here. It ruined directions for me. Oh my goodness.
because you don't need it. So maybe I'm okay with losing that. Maybe that's a sacrifice I'm okay with. But I think when it comes to our children and how complex education is, we're giving up
Yeah.
too much.
Someone recently challenged me to try to start driving more without my GPS because I mean, this is embarrassing, but it's true. I was driving my daughter's six now when she was four and a tree fell, and I really did not know another way to get where we needed to go. And I started to panic. And my 4-year-old daughter from the back seat said, Mom, all you're going to do, and do you know that she was able to tell us how to get out of the situation because she looks out the window,
Yes.
4 years old. And I was thinking, maybe I'm okay with that loss in my life if I think I'll always have that smartphone or I'll always have it. But what else am I giving up? What do I want other people? I mean, it's, like, what if I was in that situation? I didn't have my daughter. I don't know. So,
Hmm. I gotta say that it's just a comment on what you said because it's funny that you're mentioning the Waze and Google Maps. I just talked
yeah.
about it with somebody a few days ago. I mean, it's beyond what you started saying, Danny, is that it's back then when you were printing maps, you knew the area, you knew the streets. But
Hmm.
for me, I used to travel and navigate a lot and travel a lot, both walking, hiking, and driving. So, and I'm way older than you, so I was very familiar with maps, and it's so much more than just knowing the streets, and even more than the sense of direction. I mean, it's a whole skill to learn a map and navigate and understand what the ratios between this and that. And I mean, I can tell you how many advantages are in terms of navigating or learning, where you are using a map and walking. And it's kind of sad that I agree with you. And it's just one example for what technology can do as a shortcut to make life easier, but it's not benefiting us. It's not benefiting our children.
And I'll add one thing there. You're saying that these skills are valuable, like the skill of reading a map. I think they're also meaningful and fun.
Yep.
I think there's pleasure that to be gained out of being a skilled person, and I'm afraid of this future that is a de-skilled future um, for our children, where skills are not valued because they don't need to exist.
Yep.
Um, I'll add one thing to that end, what I think is a solution for high school, and that is to keep high school challenging. When I
Mm.
say challenging, I don't mean assigning punishing amounts of homework, but it's really frightening right now to hear what's happening in English classrooms across the country. Students they're not being assigned books to read.
Yep.
Um, I think a English classroom that is assigned fewer than four books is needs to really think about that.
Yeah.
Why would we? Recently, the SAT made the reading comprehension a lot easier. Why? Students aren't really able to read a long passage anymore, and to answer a bunch of complicated questions about it. And so now the SAT has shorter passages and simpler questions. The SAT has lowered its standards. And I could understand why the SAT wants to kind of keep a level score going on. But schools should not be lowering the threshold of what thinking skills students need to be exiting with. So they need to be reading, they need to be reading difficult texts, and they
Yeah.
need to be doing difficult things, including really complicated creative tasks, tasks that will build their cognitive patience. Because we live in a world that tells you patience is for suckers. And you should be multitasking, you should be highly efficient, and you should get your job done as soon as possible. The product matters more than the process. That is a corrosive message for students, but that's the one that they're getting right now. And they need to get the opposite message. The process matters. Difficulty is okay. You can work through difficulty. You don't need to panic in the face of it.
Mhm.
Jill, I wonder, you're 20 years a teacher at this point, and have you seen a change in the way students cope with difficulty in elementary?
Oh, yeah. And I'm noticing that most of it is writing. And I think we all got guilty of expecting students to write as much as they used to. Because we have our slides, because we have, and so one of my goals for this year is to really bring back not just the writing notebook, which I feel like I never lost that being a beautiful thing, but like the content notebook, the math notebook, really getting them used to writing more. Because I find that they'll actually complain that their hand hurts if I have them write. And I was thinking back, I'm like, I never had students complain that their hand hurt writing. Like, so they're just not used to doing certain things. And so I want to make that a focus again. But I feel like there I read something about how like growth mindset has become such a big thing because of how easily kids grow like give up. And I think it's true that like we've almost had to teach like why we shouldn't give up because of how much they give up because things are just too hard. And I mean, I remember when I was teaching in the city, like my third graders would take the subway by themselves. They would get to school. I had one that actually would drink like a warm drink, like it looked like a coffee. It wasn't coffee. And I was like, you're like a little grown up. Um, So part of it, I think, honestly, I noticed this when I first started teaching in the suburbs from the city, was the parents do way too much for their kids, overgeneralizing, but in the suburbs. And I just remember thinking, wow, like, in the city, if a kid had forgotten their instrument, they didn't have it, and there was a natural consequence. But then when I came to the suburbs, it was like the parent would be late for work to make sure they dropped it off. But other than things that are like parent focused, there's definitely like everybody is so used to even just like having a question at dinner. If you don't know the answer, how many people want to rush and get their phone and look it up right away instead of talking about the answer? And I think it's sometimes okay to not know the answer right away, like, and just think about it and talk about it. And so if that's not even a part of our culture, our everyday life at home, it's certainly not happening at school. You know what I mean? Like it's everywhere. Like,
Yeah. Do you remember the old days when you said one thing that you thought was factual? Your friend
yeah.
said, no, that's wrong. This other thing is true. And then the two of you just had to sit there. If you were at dinner, you just had to sit there disagreeing with each other and move on. That's a whole skill that doesn't exist anymore. Now you just look it up.
Yeah.
It's not about the exactly. It's not about the answer. What's the right answer? It's about the process, the cognitive process that is, that's in my opinion, it's more much more important than the actual answer in the majority of cases. I wanted to ask Danny a question, and because we've been speaking about, and Jill has been talking about the changes that she has been seeing with parents and young kids, but I think this is really interesting to me, your perspective as an English teacher
Mhm.
and a high school teacher, and you have many years of experience doing this. And I don't want you to give me anecdotal examples, but what have you noticed? Because I kind of shared with you pretty honestly the difference in terms of how medical students are processing things 15 years ago, 20 years ago versus now. But I'm sure that the high school kids, I mean, you started mentioning, you're alluding to the fact that kids are reading much less. But what do you see in your class from year to year, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, COVID, and in the last few years? I wouldn't say decline, but what changes would you see? And I think that's really important from your
I'm
experience.
probably the wrong one to ask just because I don't have a consistent population. Over the last decade, I've taught in three different schools. But when I ask the teachers who have been teaching at my school for several decades, they see a decline in student attitudes and abilities. I often hear kids can't read that much anymore, or kids used to be able to read this book, but now they can't. Um, and sometimes I think, well, maybe we should be challenging them too. But then on the other hand, it's really important to calibrate the right level of book for a student. And if a student is not at the level where they can understand and enjoy Moby Dick, you should not be giving it to them. That would just be torturous. Um, I also think, I've also heard a lot that students give up a lot more easily. And this is what we've been talking about. And I see this, I think, pretty frequently now, is that there's an expectation that students have that they should be getting the right answer all the time, which is really frustrating for an English teacher when we were just discussing books and there are no right answers, and you want to express the idea of plurality. But there's a lot of frustration that students experience when there is not an easy right answer directly in front of them, and they'll shut down. In the face of it.
Do you have an answer for the people that are saying, what's the point of spending so much time learning to write when, now it's so easy, we can just, tell an AI model what to say or what we need. So like, I don't know, just like a
Thank you.
good reason as to why that's still so important.
Thank you for asking that question. I have been asked this question sincerely by people. I am offended by the question. Uh, Frankly, I know you're asking it on behalf of all these other people. Um, the idea up until 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, whenever ChatGPT was released, I think it's almost 4 years. Um, Before ChatGPT was released, when we lived in a world where writing mattered, the idea of English and even history and all the other disciplines where students had to do writing is that writing will matter for kids when they are adults. So they need to be learning how to write. This is an important skill. I don't think anyone has ever said that about chemistry. I mean, maybe for someone who went and became a medical student and a doctor, it did. But chemistry has had zero impact on my life, at least the facts of what I've learned there. Biology, very interesting topic. Would I be okay if I hadn't learned it? I think so. Trigonometry, calculus, I could go on. The thing is, we have treated English and we've treated writing as a skill that students needed to learn for a practical reason. What we have not been realizing is that in the teaching of writing, students are learning how to be human. Students are learning how to be
Mm.
themselves. They're learning how to think. Writing is thinking. So I do not regret having taken chemistry, even though it's made probably zero impact on my life. When do the bonds between chemicals really matter to me? But in that classroom, I learned a new way of thinking. I learned that I could challenge information and that there is a scientific process by which I can think through a problem and come to an understanding or admit a lack of understanding.
Mm.
In math, I learned logical ways of thinking that probably have, changed who I am as a person in ways I don't really quite understand. In history, I've come to understand that the world that I live in is not unprecedented, and that um, what we are living through right now is related to what happened 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And I can learn from these ancient texts. Um, that is what writing is at this point. I'm afraid. I've heard some people say that writing will become a niche topic, like music in art
Yeah.
class. It'll become an elective or something. But I don't think that's true because as you learn to write, you learn to think. And that might be true of
Yeah.
music and art too, which I think should be more valued and more present in schools.
I love your answer to that on so many levels. You're right. We haven't said that for any of the other subjects. We're missing the whole point when we have that like just the definition of even asking the question. Like I haven't heard anyone say anything different. Although there are people now saying, "Oh, what's the point of schools now if everything is which I guess is another philosophical debate. But I think we're learning all those skills you just said, right? Like all those human skills. And also, if you don't expose kids to all these different types of things and topics, they don't know what they're going to be interested in, what they're going to be good at, what they definitely don't want to do.
Here's the inverse of the question you asked me. Shouldn't we be teaching kids how to use AI in school?
Mm.
Right? Because that is the skill that they'll be using perhaps in their careers. Uh, I don't know. What do you two think of that? Should we be
I
teaching kids how to use
I
AI?
I think this is something that because I'm living and breathing I can tell you what I think. I think that learning AI for children is, for the vast majority of cases, is something that you don't really need. The technology is evolving so quickly. And even when you're talking about, let's say, what are the digital skills? Let's learn how to code and stuff. The coding now is not gonna, it's not relevant anymore because people do vibe coding and the AI can code for you. So as we're moving forward with time, you don't really need to code. You just tell the machine, as I'm speaking with you, hey, Danny, hey, Jill, I need you to create a program for me that will calculate how many oranges I'm eating a day and how much money I'm spending. And it will code everything for you. So the point is that the interface between the humans and the AI is becoming simpler and simpler. And as we will progress, it's going to become simpler and simpler. So let's say that you take, and I'm convinced about this, I see this, you take somebody who is 18 years old, who never saw a computer. They studied somewhere in the forest with the wolves, whatever, and you come out, they only know how to read and write, and you teach them the skills of the AI. They'll it's basically so intuitive and easy. And I think that the last thing, whenever I hear people saying, oh, they need how to learn AI because this is going to be the future. First of all, the future of AI 2 years ago is not what it is now. Certainly not going to be the same in 10 years from now. And the
Yes.
most important thing, as you said, Danny, is that I see everything when you're talking about the reading and writing and trigonometry and biology. It's really like I imagine kind of like a skeleton, and the spine, the most important structure that is carrying everything is the reading and the writing, and everything else is important. It has, its role, but the reading and the writing is, and I see this, my kids, my daughter was 8 years old, my son who is 6 years old, who wrote like a code language. Every word is coded by a little picture. And then he goes and he writes a little story. Or my daughter who's 8 years old and writing like this little cute journal. I mean, it's teaching, it like you said, it's
Yeah.
humanity. It's expressiveness. It's the thought process. And this is the most important thing. Forget about AI. Oh, AI in the
Yeah.
future, they'll be fine without it. That's why I'm so against it
Yeah.
in schools.
I think that also everybody gets caught up, and I feel like a broken record. There's such a difference between education and access. Children need to know what AI is. This is what's around them. They need to know, of course, safety, why we shouldn't be trusting certain texts or images or resources. They need to know implications if they use it and they do something that they shouldn't, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues now with kids taking pictures of kids and doing things they shouldn't. So they need to know that. But that to me is just as similar to my children knowing we stop at stoplights. We stop at, red means this, green means this, yellow means this. You don't drink and drive. You like my children actually know a lot about the rules of driving, and they're in elementary school and they will not be driving anytime soon. So everybody wants to put these two things together. You can educate about something that you don't necessarily have access to because you're too young. And what a waste of time to teach what AI looks like now to children when, like you said, I actually just rewatched the AI doc on one of my flights because I don't know, I like to rewatch documents about these things. And in one of the interviews, he's like, whatever I tell you right now, it's not even going to be this way by the time this movie comes out. That's how fast this stuff is moving. So why are we wasting time trying to teach what it looks like now? And I agree, it is meant to be as easy as possible because they want you to use it. And a lot of the skills we used to teach aren't necessary because programs can code. But you want to know what I still think is amazing? Unplugged coding, because that is really teaching those coding skills that are actually a lot of life skills.
Mhm.
I don't know. So one of the last questions that we have for you, Danny, is a really interesting. So who owns the future? This was sort of one of our ending points that you were thinking about with your presentation, like
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about
that. Yeah,
uh, how there's this whole idea that we need to prepare these kids for the future.
yeah,
Um, but that idea of the future and who owns it is really key. Like, I think the way that we're thinking when we say we need to prepare the kids for an AI-oriented future is a future defined by Apple, Google, OpenAI, um, and Microsoft. It is not a future that we own.
yeah,
I think school and parents are often guilty of this. A posture towards the future that is anticipatory and not proactive. This idea that um, the future, the word future itself is biased, right? The word future in our minds connotes technological change.
mm,
Um, and when Steve Jobs got on the stage and announced the iPhone, when OpenAI released ChatGPT 3.5 years ago, we feel ourselves being thrust into this uncertain future and forced to react to it. It's a future that's created by tech companies. And we might struggle against that future, or we might try to angle our way into it. But all the time, that is working on a concept of the future that we do not own. And as a parent and as a teacher, I completely reject that concept of the future. I think we have a lot more power to shape the future than tech companies want us to know.
yeah,
Um, and they're scared, tech companies. They're struggling to, stop legislation from happening, to stop parents from organizing, and to keep tech in schools. I think they're starting to be on a back foot. Um, we have the ability to like imagine a life that is not just defined by AI. And it's our responsibility to do that, to ask the question of what is a good life going to be for our kids? What does that mean? And to strive in pursuit of that goal rather than to react to whatever new hell OpenAI has for us.
And I have to say, I have to just comment on this because when you were talking, Jill, and you were talking about the future and how to prepare and who owns the future, I'm thinking you saying future, the first three words that come into my mind are past, present, and future. And this kind of in a way links to the talk that we're going to have next week with the conversation with Perk, who's an educator of more than 50 years. And for me, honestly, I don't really care so much about the future. I don't, even though I'm dealing with AI and stuff, for my children, I focus on the present. And meaning focusing on the present is that I drink the juice of every moment that I have with them. But even when I'm with them or I'm going upstairs and they're on their own doing their stuff, the power of boredom, the power of unstructured play, of just being present and being aware, discover different things, and not thinking about the future, not thinking about how should education, but be focused and anchored in the present moment. I mean, that sounds like some sort of a guru, but I mean it and I practice it at home. Play the games with the children and whatever, the Fox game and the card game and all these things, and play the ball with them and let them get, bored because you're doing something. And for 2 hours, they're creating something from boxes or something. This is the most important thing. When I think about future for my kids, I think about the present,
That's beautiful.
moment.
Beautiful, Yair. And I see all the time in high school, kids, I work in a high pressured high school. I see kids all the time struggling to get a slightly higher grade because they have to get into that slightly better college so that they get into that slightly better grad school, so that they get that slightly better job. And kids are so future focused.
Yeah.
And I asked them, do you really think, I take them through that, so you're working to get into college, where you'll work to get into a grad school, where you'll work to get into a job, where you'll work to get a promotion, and where you'll work to get into a better job. When do you think in that chain of events you'll be happy? When do you think you're going to be present and enjoying life? Like, what if now was the time that happened?
Jill,
So good, but yeah.
I think that with this, I got carried away. I didn't even notice
Yes.
it's 9:48 Eastern time,
Yes.
but I think it's time to say goodbye. And thank you, Danny, so much for this. We covered so many, we jumped from so many topics, but for me at least, I really enjoyed the conversation with the two of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really loved having you. You gave me a lot of new things to think about, and I feel like I'm going to end up reading about Skinner because my research of him was not on this topic, and it's kind of fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real fun conversation.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And stay tuned for our new Spotify or whatever podcast that we're going to have.
So the video will be posted on Yair's website, Pencils Over Pixels, and then the podcast will be posted on Spotify. So real world kids. That's it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Danny. And
thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.